all you'll need is some fabric, just like this. I used a non-stretch fabric, and then some pants that you already own. And then you're just gonna fold the fabric over so it has 2 layers, and then put your pants down. I'm just taking time to lay it down evenly. Just fold them in half on one side. It doesn't matter if you do the front or the back first. And just make sure everything is laying as flat as possible. And then I'm going to cut and add extra space, about 1 inch, around the pants. I wanted to make these a little less wide leg than the pants I already owned, so you can kind of make adjustments that way if you want them wider or skinnier, and then trace the top up the other side of the leg, and then cutting here as well. I would recommend adding like an extra inch. And then the top part, you can see the waistband is cinched in on the pants that I have. And so you do want to make sure that if you're just using regular pants that aren't cinched in, you can cut around with just your extra inch. But for mine, I added all of this extra space by stretching these out and kind of seeing what that looked like, and keeping a lot of extra space on the top, probably 2 inches or more, and then flip to the other side. So if you did the back of your pants folded, now we're just switching over to the front, or vice versa. If you did the front first, switch to the back now. And then fold those in half again and move over to another part of your fabric so that you can cut the other part of your pants. And again, I'm just tracing, trying to do similar amount of space I added to the bottom of the pants as well as on the side, because you'll want them to be similar length. It doesn't have to be exact. Honestly, you can trim it later, but try to follow a similar guide, cutting around here, then down the other leg again. Like I mentioned, I'm making mine a little less wide-legged, so that's why I moved it out of the way. And then now you have your pattern pieces, and what we're going to do is sew together with those fabric right side together these curved pieces of the front and the back. I'm using sewing clips to just clip everything in place. Now moving over to my sewing machine, I am using just a regular straight stitch, and make sure to backstitch at the beginning of your stitch and then just sew down the line. I'm using a 5/8 seam allowance, and this is my Brother SE 2000 sewing machine. I've linked it in the description as well if you're interested. It's a great machine. And then once you get to the end, backstitch there as well to hold your seam in place. Now moving over to my serger, you can definitely just use a zigzag stitch on your regular sewing machine if you don't have a serger. And if you do have one, just finish the edge of your seam that you did earlier so that the fabric doesn't fray. Now you are just going to lay down one of your pieces, front or back. Make sure everything is flat, and then lay the other side on top of that and make sure all the seams are lining up. I like to start in the crotch area and make sure those are lined up, and I'm going to use my sewing clips again and just clip everything in place down the inside of the leg, and then down each side of the leg as well. Because I did a rough estimate cutting the bottom of my pants, it's okay if the hem doesn't line up perfectly. I would make sure the top lines up, and then at the bottom you can always trim off any excess that is there. But yeah, just pin everything, and then once you get here, we are going to sew where we just pinned or clipped, which is the inseam on the inside of the leg, and then down each side of the leg. I am again just going to use my regular sewing machine with a straight stitch and a 5/8 seam allowance, and sew down the sides. And then when it comes to the inseam, I personally like to start at the crotch seam and then sew down the side of one leg first. I find sometimes if I start at the bottom of the leg and get to the crotch, it can be mismatched when I get there because fabric can slide around. So that's why I like to start at the top so there's no weird bunching or anything. And then once I get to the bottom, I will just go back to where I started before at the top of the crotch and sew down the other leg. And I finish these with my serger as well, or you can use your zigzag stitch. And then we are going to just take those pants you put together and flip them right side out. Once they're right side out, or you could before technically, but I like to flip it right side out and then just press your seams, which just means to iron your seams. This might sound like a step that isn't that important, but it does help when you're trying it on and doing future steps. Just make everything look really clean and professionally finished. Okay, I highly recommend at this step to try them on before doing anything else. Just make sure you don't need to make any adjustments. I folded down the top and just like tucked it under. Since I have the belly, mine will go lower in the front than normal, but so far so good. I need to iron them more, but looking good. We can move on to the next step. I also decided I'm just gonna pin this right now because I like this general placement. It's gonna cinch in with the drawstring, but I'm just gonna pin it right now. There's lots of excess fabric, so we'll do that before we move to the next step. Like I said before, I am just going to pin this in place now. I have it folded over about like 2 inches maybe, but that's why you always want to add extra room to the top, and you can fold it over as much as you wish. You definitely need at least maybe about 1 inch. And then I realized since I folded this over, I actually do need to finish that raw edge of the top band first. So unfolding it a little, kind of a funky step. You could probably finish the top with your serger or a zigzag stitch before folding it over would be better, but this is how I'm doing it just since I like that placement. But just using my serger to finish that top seam. I'm not sewing anything in place or anything like that, just making sure that raw edge is finished. Now that the edge is finished, I am going to, with my folded under top edge, I am just going to top stitch that down to create a channel for the drawstring. So if you make a thick drawstring, you want your channel to be thicker. If it's super thin, you can make a thin channel, but I am going to do, I believe mine's about 1/2 inch, and just sew this all the way around, top stitching it to keep that folded part over. And here it is on my machine. You can see I am just putting the fabric under and just doing a regular top stitch. You can start anywhere. I usually like to start on the sides or the back, since the few back stitches sometimes make a little bit of a thicker stitch, but yeah, just sew all the way around. Once again, we are moving over to the ironing board to press this seam, and this will just make everything look all nice and finished. So yeah, just use your iron and press this down. Now we're going to make the actual drawstring itself. So I have this fabric on the fold and then also folded in half so I can cut double the length at the same time and keep my line straight. But basically you want it to be your waist measurement plus probably about 1 foot. I don't really do precise measurements. I just make it long enough to be able to tie a bow, and I can always trim it later. But what you're going to do is, with this folded over right sides together, just sew a straight stitch on your regular sewing machine and just sew all the way down to the other end. And I don't finish these seams with my serger because it can just make it bulky, and since the raw edge is inside of the drawstring, it really won't matter if it frays a little bit in there. So yeah, just finish, go straight down your entire drawstring. Time to flip it right side out so it's a nice drawstring. And I am using my loop turner, which is a nice little tool. They're pretty cheap on Amazon, or at stores, but you can also just use a safety pin if that's all you have. You can absolutely do that, but yeah, just flip this drawstring right side out. And back to the ironing board again, just pressing this. This will make it looks kind of round and bunchy without pressing it, and then when I press it, it just looks really nice and clean. So do that, and then we are almost done. Next, this might be a little controversial, but I am just cutting in the holes for the drawstring now. The right way to do it would be to chalk and mark where your holes go before sewing down and top stitching that top band and doing actual buttonholes, like finishing a buttonhole nicely. But I find that just cutting the holes and using a little fray check maybe, which is a glue type thing you can put on there, works just fine, and it doesn't make a big difference. So up to you. This is just a very quick, easy make, so I like to keep things quick and easy, and I never find that it creates problems for me down the line, like wearing the item and washing it and stuff. But just wanted to add that note. But yeah, you can see I just used a safety pin and put the drawstring through those holes all the way around and just kind of carefully thread it through and then out the other side. And the very last step is just to hem the bottom of your pants. I'm using my cover stitch machine. I have the Juki MCS 1500, but you can also just use your regular sewing machine for this. Just fold over or fold under the hem and top stitch that down. You can finish the edge first and then just top stitch it in place to hem it. Here's the final look.